Hello, everyone.
Hello and welcome everyone. And I will also start by showing my screen. Just a second. So let me do that. And now you should be able to see my screen. Is that correct, Kim?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to this webinar about Cradle to Cradle. And we have a lot of content to present. My name is Karen Ekberg, and I'm the CEO and also the founder of Leadership and Sustainability. We are actually celebrating 10 years this year. I have a long experience in the sustainability area and leadership and sustainability. We are today more than 80 people in total. And we have several business entities also abroad in other countries. We work a lot with Cascale, but we are also now cradle to cradle assessors, and that will be the topic of today. And let me now hand over to Kim.
Yes, let me also introduce myself. Yes, I am Kim. I have done a bachelor's degree in international business as well as a master's in international business. And then I did a second master's degree in sustainability and systematic management. And I have been with LNS for about 3 years now. I have started as a working student, and I am now full-time with the company for a year. And I am co-leading the supply chain team, managing verifications, as well as the different certification schemes that we offer globally. And as a supply chain manager, I also oversee and coordinate all the verifications we're doing for the environmental, social, as well as for the chemical schemes. And just examples of what we offer, as Karin already mentioned, are HIC FEM, SLCP, ZEG Supply to Zero and InkCheck, and Cradle to Cradle.
Okay, and just before we move on to the next slide, I would just like to ask the audience, can you hear us well? Could you just send a message in the Q&A function just to be sure that that we can hear you or that you can hear us? Sorry. Okay, it sounds good. Great, wonderful. Okay,
Perfect.
sorry for that, Kim. Please go.
No worries. Then we can continue. Yes, all our participants today will be muted, just that we have the perfect sound for ourselves. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function, not the chat, but please the Q&A function. The first of you already used it, so you can see here in the pictures on the right where you can find that function. Yes, and then following up this webinar, we will also provide you a link to the recording of this webinar, and you will also be able to download the presentation slides with that email. And please note that all the materials today are copyrighted by Cradle to Cradle, as well as Leadership and Sustainability. Today we have on the agenda a welcome and an introduction to LNS. Then I will talk about the Cradle to Cradle standard overview. We will go into the requirements of the version 4.1, as well as the assessment process. And lastly, we will give some information about leadership and sustainability, and then we will finish off with questions and discussion. Yes, let me start with the Cradle to Cradle standard overview. As an introduction into the Cradle to Cradle topic, next slide, please. Yes. We see that the production of clothing has doubled in the last 15 years, but with decreasing market prices. And actually 75% of the clothing still ends up in landfills. And only 1% of the clothing so far is upcycled into new clothing. That gives an enormous potential into reusing our resources. And therefore, sustainability, or more specifically, the topic of circularity, is a key opportunity for resilient business models. And also, the upcoming legislation requires companies to have validated green claims for circular, so it becomes more and more important for your products. With Cradle to Cradle, there are 3 different certification types. The first certification type is the Cradle-to-Cradle Certified Material Health. With that, only the material health sector is certified. Then there comes the second certification, that is the Cradle-to-Cradle Certified Circularity. That is a new certification. And with that, material health as well as product circularity sectors are covered. And then lastly, we do have the Cradle-to-Cradle Certified Full Scope. That includes the first two sectors, as well as the clean air and climate protection sector, the water and soil stewardship sector, and then lastly, the social fairness sector. I will now give a brief introduction of what each of these sectors is about. So material health is about ensuring that the materials used in the products are safe for humans as well as for the environment. The product circularity sector enables a circular economy throughout the product and the process design. The clean air and climate protection is about generating clean energy and protecting the environment. The water and soil stewardship is about safeguarding air, water, and soil resources. And lastly, the social and fairness is about the social and fair and equitable labor practices that advance the human rights and strong communities with the production and processes of your product. There are 4 different achievement levels, so each product can then achieve a level for each of the categories that we just explained to you. And the 4 different achievement levels are then bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So it starts with bronze in the bottom, as you see, and silver would be 1 level better than gold and platinum. And actually, each of the categories that we have seen in the previous slide will get an achievement level, and then in the end, the lowest achievement level that one of the categories achieved, that will be the achievement level for the overall certification. And we do have a few standard documents that we would like to share with you. These are linked here, so once you receive the slides in the end, you will be able to access all these documents. So we do have the product standard here, then the circularity standard, as well as the restricted substances list, a volatile organic compound content limits, and lastly, the full scope standard that you can download here. And now I will hand over to Karin for the requirements.
Thank you so much, Kim. Okay, so let me now talk about the specific requirements in the new standard version 4.1. And before I go into the details here, I wish to point out that the version 4.1 is very different from the previous versions. Version 4.1 is more challenging and more complex than the previous versions. But on the other hand, you have the benefit that you can do either also, you can do the full scope, as Kim explained, or you can also do the material health scope, or you can do the circularity scope. And both of these 2 latter scopes are, of course, smaller, let's say, in total. And I will now take you through the requirements at quite a detailed level. So there is quite a lot of content to come here. First of all, there is a general requirement, and the very first general requirement, that is about the overall commitment to protect the environment. And this is, of course, also very important. And there should also be an intention to ultimately achieve the platinum level in all categories. So most companies who start with their first certification, they might actually aim at the bronze level to begin with. Perhaps in some of the categories, they might be able to reach the silver level. But then over time, the intention of the institute and of the standard is really that you should seek to improve, so to say, by every certification cycle that you have and reach higher levels and even up to the platinum level. And the general requirements, they are also divided into the 4 levels. So at bronze level, the applicant should have a documented certification compliance assurance system in place. It should assess environmental risks for the company, final manufacturing stage facilities, and the product. It should commit to protecting the environment through company policy. It should develop a strategy for implementing the environmental policy and report on progress at each recertification. So it is like a continuous process. You have your certification. 1 or 2 years later, you go through the recertification, and then you actually need to show your improvements. And you should also, as at the bronze level already, demonstrate commitment and support for establishing and maintaining a culture whereby employees and business partners can achieve high levels of environmental performance. At silver level, the applicant should implement a management system that supports the achievement of the environmental policy commitments within facility operations and for the applicant company. But also request environmental performance data from high-risk Tier 1 suppliers, implement a grievance mechanism, have a transparent governance and reporting, including information and management of environmental risks. And at gold level, the applicant should implement a responsible sourcing management system that supports the achievement of the environmental policy commitments within the product supply chain. So you see there is always this requirement to achieve the environmental policy by increasing the standards. And then also at gold level, implement a grievance mechanism at all contract manufacturing facilities, incorporate stakeholder engagement and feedback into environmental risk management, and inform strategy and operations. And finally, at platinum level, you should incorporate environmental objectives into relevant employee and executive performance evaluations, and with incentives, encourage management and employees to achieve environmental goals. So these are the general requirements here. And now I would like to talk a bit about the restricted chemicals in cradle-to-cradle products, because as you can hear, we have the section material health, but of course the chemicals management and the chemical content in the cradle-to-cradle products, if you go for certification, is really a very, very important piece. So in general, the restriction is that the chemicals that are hazardous for humans or the environment, they are restricted. And the restricted chemicals include, but are not limited to organohalogens, PFAS, for example, halogenated flame retardants, carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxicants, and also persistent bioaccumulative and toxic substances, so PBTs. So you see, it's a long list. We all know this list already, I believe, from other standards and other programs. But here you see they are completely restricted here for cradle to cradle. And as we go forward, so the material health enables companies several important steps in improving their chemical management. So it is about going beyond chemical regulations and comply with and stay ahead of leading international regulations, understand the chemistry of your product, so fully define the chemical composition of each material. This is a really, really big and important cornerstone of the certification. Comprehensively also assess the toxicological properties of each substance in the material and product context, to optimize product and process chemistry without making regrettable substitutions, not always so easy. Identify and eliminate chemicals of concern while verifying that alternatives are compatible with human and environmental health, and develop an actionable strategy to address toxic emissions in the supply chain. And the requirements for material health, beginning with the bronze level, is to ensure that the product is in compliance with the RSL, with the restricted substance list, and ensure the product does not contain any of the chemicals that I just talked about previously. Then to assess 75% of the product, to develop a strategy to phase out or optimize all unassessed and problematic chemicals. And then at silver level, to assess 95% of the product, and to ensure that the product does not contain materials with more than 1% C-bonded halogen by weight. So, for example, PBTs, etc. And then also to ensure that the product has low VOC emissions and complies with VOC limits. At the goal level, you are requested to assess all chemicals and materials subject to review in the product, 100%, and optimize the product for material health. So all chemicals are compatible with human and environmental health. You should also ensure that the product has very low VOC emissions or is inherently non-emitting. Develop a strategy to increase the percentage of preferred materials and chemicals in the product or optimize the chemistry in the supply chain. And then coming to the platinum level, assess all product relevant process chemicals as compatible with human and environmental health. Assess more than 50% of the product by weight as preferable for human and environmental health. Address toxic emissions in the supply chain. And here you have some options. And then, yes, so there are lots of additional content related to that requirement, but I will not go through that in detail. And so these are the requirements, of course, in a very summarized manner. If you go to the full standard or to the user guidance of the standard, you will see that we are talking about several hundred pages of requirements and guidance. So this is really just a summary for you. And then under 4.1, you can expect the following steps in the assessment process. So the disclosure down to the chemical level will be necessary for the certifying product. And this may involve investigation and data collection across multiple tiers of the supply chain. So you can imagine if you have to have X% transparency on all the chemicals used in the product, then you might really drill down into your supply chain and collect a lot of information in your supply chain. And then we also have all material formulation disclosures must be accompanied by either a signed bill of material or a signed restricted substances list declaration. And the material health assessor will assess all materials in the product and confirm the cradle-to-cradle certification achievement level. So that within the total assessment, you always also have specifically a material health assessor who takes care of this section, the material health section. And then the material health assessor will also assess all materials. It will also, depending on the product and material types used, the test results may be needed to show compliance with the cradle-to-cradle requirements. And again, a strategy, you need to have a strategy for material health optimization. And then we also have a small note, and that is that certain products, they may not be eligible to achieve bronze in material health under the version 4.1. In these cases, they must be at least silver in this section to be eligible for cradle-to-cradle certification. So this can be, for example, children's products, cosmetics, and personal care products. And just an example for the material health section, you have the different steps. So you have the full chemical composition disclosure that you need to have. You conduct the chemical assessment according to the cradle-to-cradle requirements. You need to have the test results, and you need to have the achievement, and that should be confirmed by leadership and sustainability based on your assessment results. And finally, you also need your strategy to be developed for the optimization of the use of the materials for material health. And now if we move over to the circularity requirements, for product circularity, the requirements are for bronze level to define the intended cycling pathways for the product and its materials. and to define a plan for improving the cycling infrastructure and identify cycling partnerships. And you can also, as an alternative, report limitations publicly, but you do need to do that. And it's not so easy to define the cycling partnerships, for example, because you may need to drill down into the local markets where you are selling your products. And then you also need to ensure that 50% or more than 50% of the materials by weight are compatible with intended cycling pathways. You also need to ensure that the circularity data and the cycling instructions are publicly available, so that anyone, consumer who buys your product, can always go back to a public website or information and find information about the cycling instructions. For silver level, you should initiate cycling partnerships. You should also now ensure that more than 70% of the materials are compatible with intended cycling pathways. So you can see that a general trend when we go from level to level here is always that we increase the percentage of the materials or the percentage of the product that reaches a certain standard. And then also you should have the percentage of the cycled and or renewable content. It should be equal to industry averages or consistent with company practice. There is an alternative that limitations that prevent achievement of this requirement are publicly reported again. And then finally, at this level, to develop a strategy for improving product circularity. So you see that as well. Generally, for all the categories, you need to define a strategy on how to improve. Moving on to the goal level, here you need to ensure that more than 90% of the materials are compatible with intended cycling pathways. The percentage of the cycled and or renewable content is equal to industry leader. And then ensure that the materials are compatible for high value cycling, implement a circular design opportunity, design for product disassembly, and finally here, actively cycle the product and or implement a program to increase the cycling rate. Really quite strict requirements here at gold level. And finally, we have the platinum level. And now we are talking about the requirement of having more than 99% of the materials compatible with intended cycling pathways. You need to make sure that the percentage of cycled and or renewable content is equal to technical maximum. So you even need to research and make sure that you have the information about what is actually technically possible. You should also define at least 2 intended cycling pathways for the product and its materials. You should actively cycle a minimum amount of the product, and you should demonstrate a monitoring program to track the cycling rates and the quality, and an increase in the cumulative rate and the quality. So really quite challenging requirements here. And then if we continue, we have the assessment process for the circularity section. So you should have information on the recycled and renewable content that will be collected for the product materials, and it may include data also and documentation collection from the supply chain to confirm the recycled or renewable content claims. Then you also have the majority of the products are required to have recycled renewable content in the materials in order to achieve silver or higher. And the biological materials from certain crops associated with ecosystem destruction, for example, palm oil, must be certified to an accepted standard to be counted as renewable. The applicant will create a cycling plan for the product and demonstrate that the product is aligned with circularity standards, and depending on the achievement level and product type, the documentation may be required to validate the evidence of active cycling. And there are also certain products that are not eligible to achieve bronze or silver in the product circularity. In these cases, they must be at least gold in this section in order to be eligible for Cradle to Cradle certification. And this includes, for example, single-use plastic products and plastic packaging products. So here, bronze or silver is not possible to do at all. You need to go to the next level, which is then gold. And when we come to the assessment, still about product circularity, but then about the materials, you will need to define the cycling pathway for each material, and you need to decide, is it a biological or a technical cycle? And I will speak a bit about those two different cycles very soon. Then you also need to have the input materials to be evaluated for alignment with circular economy. And we remember the percentage of the renewable or recycled content that you need to have. Testing results need to be available. A plan for increasing the percentage of renewable or recycled material should be developed. And this is then from the silver level onwards. And also you should demonstrate that the materials are compatible with the cycling pathway and have a high value cycling potential. So also, I think that might have already been clear, but of course, when you move from one level to another, let's say you want to achieve gold level, of course, you always have to take with you also the bronze and the silver requirements. So all the requirements from previous levels, they are of course also applicable to the next higher level. But I think that's probably quite clear. And so now, what is the difference here between the biological cycle and the technical cycle? Let us look at the biological cycle first. So material at a maximum thickness and density must biodegrade in intended pathway. So it could be composting, aerobic, or as specified by a compostability standard test. Organic additives with more than 1% must biodegrade as specified by the biodegradability standard test, or also available scientific literature. A soil sample from disintegration testing of material must pass an ecotoxicity test to confirm it's conducive to plant growth. And then on the technical cycle, it requires that the materials must be cyclable in the intended technical pathway. This could be municipal recycling, take-back program, etc. And evidence of the compatibility of materials must be provided or confirmed in an assessment. Homogeneous materials that need to be separated in order to be cycled must be separable as well by entity implementing the cycle. So of course, otherwise you cannot separate them if it's not possible. But of course, it may be really quite challenging with homogeneous materials to do this. And for materials with unavoidable release to the environment, the percentage on average likely to be released cannot be counted towards compatible with the technical cycle. So, for example, we have tires. There you have an unavoidable release to the environment. Whenever you drive your car, there will be a certain small release of particles from the tire. And and then we have the high value recycling, so-called as well. Here we require that the materials must not contain additives or features that are likely to result in a low value reprocessed materials. And also materials must be able to substitute for virgin material without loss of essential product function or material durability. They need to contain at least 80% renewable or post-consumer recycled content, or have at least 2 plausible next uses. Yes, so that was the difference now between the biological and technical cycle. And now I want to speak also, we are still in the product circularity section, but I want to talk a bit more about the product. So for the product, you need to develop a plan on how to implement cycling for the product, including discrete actions and timelines. You need to describe and provide evidence of relevant partnerships or internal resources for product cycling. You need to make circularity data and cycling instructions for product publicly available. You need to develop a plan for implementing and implement a circular design opportunity or innovation. And you need to demonstrate that active cycling is in place for the product and or a program to increase cycling. This is at gold level then. And now we come to the clean air and climate protection. And here I will not go into that much detail as previously, but in the assessment process, you can expect that a validation of compliance with air emission permits will take place, and that will include a review of permits and test results, a full inventory of all energy usage and emissions from the previous year at manufacturing facilities for the product. So this will also require documentation to confirm the values, like, for example, looking at utility invoices, fuel purchase receipts, etc. And some of you who are working with other programs, at least in the apparel, footwear, and textile sector, you are aware that there are other tools that are also doing this. So here the requirements are not much different from what we see in other tools. But then also, depending on the achievement level, a percentage of energy is required to be renewable, and a percentage of emissions are required to be addressed. So this achievement at gold and platinum levels includes some limitations. So for example, at platinum, it is required that electricity associated with the final manufacturing stage be procured through on-site renewable energy installations or a long-term renewable energy PPA. And then for certain product types, energy efficiency certifications are required. This could be, for example, Energy Star. And then applicants will need to create a strategy for improvement in this section. We have heard that before, that you need an improvement strategy. And then embodied emissions are required to be quantified and addressed at certain levels, and third-party validation and emissions transparency will also be required at certain levels. And this depends a bit on the product type that you have. And now we come to the water and soil stewardship. And here for the assessment, you can expect that a risk assessment needs to be conducted by the applicant to understand the product's impact to water stress and quality. The validation of compliance with effluent discharge permits, and which will include review of permits and test results. At silver level and above, validation that third-party treatment facilities are in compliance with permits may be required. This will include collecting permits and test results for these facilities. So even if you have a municipal wastewater treatment plant that you are discharging to, you actually here need to collect the permits and the test results also for these facilities. You also need an inventory of annual water usage at the facility, and a supporting evidence utility invoices will be required to confirm the values reported and the quantities reported for withdrawal. Facilities in higher risk areas for water stress and quality may be required to demonstrate existing technologies and best practices that are already in place to conserve water or improve water quality. And applicants also need to create a strategy for improvement. And we have heard that before. At gold level, engagement with the supply chain will be required in most cases for materials that create a significant impact on water quantity or quality during production. And finally, at certain levels, the applicant must be involved in a water project and provide the data on the impact. So quite rigorous requirements here. And then when we come to the social fairness section, the requirements are at bronze level. to complete a human rights risk assessment for application through Tier 1, have a human rights policy based on international standards and risk assessment, have a strategy for policy implementation, including performance objectives, measure performance, plan corrective actions and progress at renewal for the final manufacturing facilities, and complete selected corrective actions. Could be child or forced labor, structural safety, etc. And then also finally to ensure the executive commitment to achieving high levels of performance. And then there is another requirement also for recertification. Here you need to analyze your performance data to measure progress on achieving your strategy. At silver level, we have the requirements to request performance data from Tier 1 suppliers in high-risk locations, but also plan and track corrective actions, to establish and implement a human rights management system for implementation and oversight of policy, to implement a grievance mechanism, to put up a social impact project, to ensure transparent governance and reporting as well. And then at gold level, we have the requirements to assess human rights risk for product components and raw materials. So not only for the suppliers themselves, to certify materials to address risk of child labor, forced labor, or conflict, to inform strategy through stakeholder engagement and feedback, to implement a grievance mechanism at all contract manufacturers. And now the last level, platinum level, the requirements are to have collaboration to solve intractable or different social issues, and to ensure a diverse, inclusive, and engaged work environment and living wage as well. And to summarize about the steps in the assessment process for social fairness, we have a risk assessment on the social impact. We have the collection and review of social commitments and policies. The manufacturing facilities must confirm alignment with leading human rights practices, and documentation required will range from data for safety practices at the facility, like building permits, PPE requirements, emergency signage, etc., to human resource practices like age verification procedures, timekeeping, and sampling of working hours. And there are some third-party social audits that cover this requirement in its entirety. And in high-risk locations, this data must be collected by a qualified third party. At silver level, we also need to have the performance data that it is described by requested from Tier 1 suppliers in high-risk locations. And it is also required to demonstrate and document that the applicant has appropriate systems in place to align with best practices for social impact. And then at certain levels, the applicant must be involved in a social project and provide data as well on the impact. We have one more or two more sections, packaging and social animal welfare. So product packaging must meet high product circularity standards at the entry level of certification, ensuring alignment with the cradle-to-cradle principles for these typically non-circular product types, while also protecting animal welfare during all production phases when material from animals is used in a certified product. And so the requirements for packaging, they should be packaging materials that are included in a single sales unit at the point of purchase. They must comply with restricted substances lists. So they must meet the RSL list and the restrictions on organohalogens. And then there are some additional requirements also related to packaging. So there are some different criteria that for packaging you need to meet, either 1 for bronze, silver, or you need to meet 2 of the criteria for gold or platinum, and of the different criteria here. So cycle and renewable content, recycling and compostability, for example. And there are lots of different sub bullets here that you would need to adhere to as well. And with that, we have gone through all the requirements at a bit of a high level and still a lot of details, I know. And now I would like to continue with the assessment process, and I would like to give you just a very high-level overview of the assessment process. So first of all, you heard me saying at the beginning of this webinar that the requirements in the standard 4.1, they are quite substantial. So you need to understand when you start on the journey to certify for the first time for a specific product or for a group of products, you need to be aware that this is a bigger project to work on. It's a bigger project for you, but it is also a bigger project for the assessor. And it also takes quite a long time. So we are talking about several months in the process. So let me just give you that overview. So we are talking about 3 very high-level phases: inventory, assessment and audit, and then submit for the certification. And you can see here 2 to 6 months, 2 to 4 months, 2 to 4 months. So in total, we are maybe talking about perhaps even 1 year duration of such a project. So you need to have, for the inventory, you need to have a bill of materials provided for each product in the product group. And it's actually, if you are interested in a proposal for an assessment and for a certification, it's very, very helpful to receive those bonds from you. And then a list of packaging materials. You also need to have company level documentation should be provided relevant to risk assessments, strategies, company policies, and management system documentation. So also here, quite a lot of information. And then facility level documentation is collected also from all manufacturing facilities. And we are talking about the final manufacturing stage, from where the product is, so to say, shipped, ready for the consumer. The assessment and audit, so we need a material health assessment for all materials. And then we need to have the packaging compliance confirmed. We need to do a company level assessment to confirm that all company level documents meet the requirements. And again, also the facility level assessment is completed to confirm all facilities meet the requirements. And for the submission, there is a report that needs to be submitted to the Cradle to Cradle Product Institute. So once everything has been done, the assessor body prepares a report that is sent then to the institute with a recommendation for certification. And the institute will then review the application and documentation and will conduct, so to say, an audit of the entire assessment. And this can involve a few rounds of comment from the institute that the assessment body then will need to respond to, and also, of course, the applicant. And after this has been done, the certificate can be issued. And and with that, I would like to just give you some information about leadership and sustainability, and then we will spend some time with your questions. So please, if you have questions, please post them from now on. So you can see here, leadership and sustainability. We have people in all these locations that are marked here on the map. And we have also business entities in many of those locations. So we have really people covering nearly the entire globe. And about us, I mentioned that we are more than 80 people in total, so we are really happy to support you wherever you are, and not whatever project you have, but we actually talk about two different types of services. So on the one hand side, we talk about supply chain services. This is everything we do in the supply chain with factory audits, with trainings, with capability building, writing handbooks for suppliers, etc. And then on the other hand, we also deliver strategy services where we develop sustainability strategies with brands and retailers, sometimes also with larger manufacturing groups. We do carbon footprinting, and we do a lot of other different services. And here you can see a high-level overview of the strategy services and a high-level overview of the supply chain services. I also want to mention that we have an e-learning platform. There are some courses available on that e-learning platform, but we also can support you if you're a brand or a supplier, we can support you with setting up your course on our platform and give your teams access to this platform. And with that was the very brief presentation about leadership and sustainability. And now I would like to move into the question session. So let us have a look if we have any questions. Yes, we have here a question about the cost for this certification. So can you please brief on cost for this certification? It's very difficult to do because it really depends on the product you have, on the chemicals that you're using, where you're located, how many final manufacturing stages you have, and also the level, of course, of certification that you want to achieve. But let's say we are talking about several tens of thousands of euros or dollars, actually, depending, as I said, about on the complexity of the product, on the certification. Of course, the circularity certification has a bit of a lower price. But it's important to know this is a significant investment. When you move into this project, it is a significant investment. And you, as an applicant, will also spend quite a lot of time supporting with the collection of all data and information. Okay. And then what are the benefits of a cradle-to-cradle assessment from your perspective for a brand and for a supplier? Well, I think the general benefit is, of course, that you have a very, very high standard. I guess this is the highest standard you can get for a product. So you know that once you have this certificate, you really have achieved a lot with your product and with your processes and with your manufacturing stages. And the benefit is that you can communicate it accordingly. You have a clear certificate and you can communicate it accordingly, including all the information about what you had to do in order to reach this certification. And then the difference between a brand and a supplier, if you as a supplier are selling to a brand, it may be a positive step for you to have a certification, because the brand can then also utilize this certification in its communication, depending on what the final steps are. But if you are producing the final product, then the brand can use that also in its marketing communication. And you know, for example, that within Europe, we have the Green Claims Directive coming up. And according to the Green Claims Directive, you can only communicate environmental or sustainability benefits if you can also verify that these statements are correct. And in this case, you can use the cradle-to-cradle certificate to prove that. So, and I think it is also a really, really good process to make sure that you have outstanding and very good standards in your own production. Yes, we have a question here. Can you certify product types, or is it done at an individual product level? As an apparel brand, we have thousands of products. Is the cost done at audit level? Or for example, for multiple products can be audited at once? Yes, I would say yes and no. It is possible to combine and we see that with many of the certificates that are available already from Cradle to Cradle, that brands have used one certificate for several products. So, for example, if you have the same value chain or the same supply chain with the same final manufacturing stages, you are using the same materials, then you can do a combination. Of course, this entire matrix of different products that you put into your certificate need to be tested accordingly. So you still need to have a BOM, let's say, for all products, showing that they are, let's say, aligned with what is done within the certification. It gets a bit more complex on the one hand side, but obviously you can put in then many different products into the same certificate. Yeah. So there are some certificates available for groups of companies that have gone together, for example, to combine their supply chain. They then have like a joint supply chain and the similar materials or the same materials adhering to one, perhaps more comprehensive, but still one BOM, and then it's possible. So there are some synergies that you can use and apply. Yeah. Good. Any further questions for us? Yes, so you have seen now the overview of all the different requirements in the different sections. And so it is demanding, but many of the requirements are actually requirements that you as a brand or also in your suppliers are already meeting. So for example, collecting data from regarding energy and water. I believe many brands already do that. Many of your suppliers are already doing that, even into software solutions, even where verifications or audits are taking place of this data, verifying that the invoices are correct, etc. So we know of some programs in the apparel, footwear, and textile sector, for example, where we have these type of tools and where this is already taking place. And improvement strategies, as a brand, you usually are quite good at developing strategies and improvement strategies. So I think there are lots of requirements that you actually already can achieve. Of course, they all need to be documented, but we know that anyway from all the different regulations that are coming up within the European Union, but also abroad in other countries like the US. We see that these requirements to have a really strong documentation is getting more and more common. Yeah. And we see that in general when we work with brands and retailers, for example, we see that many of them, they are building up like their level of proof documentation, let's say, as they go year by year. All right. Any further questions? No? All right. In that case, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for joining me and Kim. And especially, I also would like to give a big shout out and thank you to Lucas, who in our team, who has helped us to prepare this presentation for you. And with that, I want to thank you for joining and hope that you are in touch with us. You are free to contact us. Now I actually didn't show the slide with let me do that. I will just show you the slide with the contact details. Can you see that now? Not yet, huh?
No, but it's coming up now.
It's coming up now. So
Yes.
here you can see our info at address, but also you can reach out directly to Kim or myself. You can also find us on LinkedIn, of course, and on our website. And you have the address of our website here if you want to get in touch. So thanks again for joining, and take care, and hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.